Welcome to Eyes on Books. I'm so glad you're joining us this morning, and I think you will enjoy hearing about our author and our book. The book today is called A Death in Marlow, and our author will be joining us a little later, and he'll be here from England. He's a British author. I'm Elaine Schnitter. My co-host this morning is Jonathan Williams, and we will first tell you a little bit about the book and the location and the characters, who are quite interesting. And then the author will join us, and we'll be able to interview him via the magic of Zoom. So I hope you enjoy it. And first we'll let Jonathan start off by telling us about the book.
Thank you, Elaine. It's a fun read. I want to begin by saying, really, I think it should appeal to a wide range of people here in our own Laguna Woods Village. It features three remarkable women, one of whom is my age, 78, and she's quite a character. And the other two women, her partners in solving crimes, are a little younger, but such an interesting book. You know, Elaine, I don't read a lot of mystery stories recently. I've read some over the years, but my usual genre is more the hero's journey, but this was such a fun book. And I realized how much mysteries are part of our life, and it's so interesting. So, a little bit about the book. We have our three characters. We have a murder, and it takes place in the town of Marlow. And I was so pleased to discover there really is a town of Marlow.
There is, yeah.
It's such an interesting, it's between Oxford and London. You can look it up on Google. I want to go visit Marlow.
And another interesting thing is the author actually lives in Marlow.
Yeah, it's his hometown.
Yes.
We were wondering whether perhaps he gives tours. Some of his crime scenes would be so much fun. Okay, but it is a mystery story. It involves a murder, and it has a number of what I may say are very classical tropes. You know, the classical mystery story dimension. So, for example, it's got the murder in the locked room. How many times have we seen that? Very clever. It's a setup, but he carries it off wonderfully. It's got a somewhat, I think, interesting and somewhat typical comparison between the authorities and their approach to solving crimes and these three remarkable ladies who take it on themselves to go and pursue things that the police say, you know, no. But anyway, so it's got the classic locked room. It has a whole variety of clues, and I enjoyed the fact that the clues are not trivial. They're interesting, but it makes you think. Isn't that the virtue of a good mystery stories?
And yes, and it makes us kind of wonder, well, how are all of these clues going to come together when they finally figure out this mystery? And you know, the other thing about mysteries, sometimes they can be a little dark and a little frightening. Not these mysteries. Robert Thorogood, our author, has made them fun. He somehow has made solving murders entertaining, especially through the lens of these ladies, as you said. They're really interesting characters.
They're remarkable. The opening of the story, our principal character, Judith Potts, goes swimming in the Thames in the morning without any clothes on. What an eccentric character.
Yes.
But she's remarkable. She's brilliant. And she has those hunches that she likes to follow.
Yeah, and she lives right on the river, too.
Yes.
So she has her own dock and her own punt that she goes out on in the river. So she's part of the river.
One of the things I think really caught my attention was all the different dynamics that are going on in the story. So you've got the sister-brother sort of conflict and what's going on there, father, children, old wife, new wife, the wealthy. One thing that's interested me that is a dimension here, the wealthy and privileged versus those who struggle. I found that interesting too. There's so many dimensions to it. One thing that surprised me, maybe it's different in England. In England, everybody's chatty. Women go up and they ask people directly information pertaining to the murder, and everybody talks to them. Even all the suspects, one by one, open up, or they appear to open up.
They all know one another, and they're quite chummy.
Yeah, you're used to the detective having to trip somebody up, or somehow trick them into giving a clue. Just ask them questions, and everybody talks. So that's interesting.
And besides the initial murder, there's another murder where a former girlfriend of the son is poisoned.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes us in another direction.
It does. We didn't want to talk too much about the plot. We don't want to give anything away, but it does involve the murder of a wealthy, the father, he's a wealthy individual, lives in a Georgian mansion. He has inherited wealth, hasn't worked a day in his life. I found that interesting. I mean, it touched me. Do I really care about this person? Nobody deserves to die. Okay, we agree with that. But this individual, not a very nice person in some aspects. In other aspects, he's really admirable. It's multidimensional. So it's interesting how you get to look at these individual characters and your sympathies are touched. There's something about each one of them that I cared about. Well, you have to have that in a mystery story. Another dimension you have to have in a mystery story is there has to be danger. Danger to the characters that you do care about, and danger to Judith and her team.
Yes, yeah, they put themselves in precarious situations.
They do.
Constantly.
They do. They're so out there. They ask the most direct questions, and people just respond to them, but they expose themselves.
Yeah,
they take some extraordinary risks too. They drive around and pursue clues and follow cars. Oh my goodness!
They have an old van they drive around, and at some point, one of them even drives the police car. I mean, they really get into it for sure. But they're very clever.
The thing you will get caught up in if you read the book is who did it and how did they do it? How do you kill somebody when they're alone in a locked room? It's been touched on by various authors. This one, I think, carries it off pretty well.
Yes. Yeah, we don't really know until the end how that all happened.
Yeah. Hello, this is Eyes on Books. We're about to welcome our guest. Welcome, Robert Thorogood, the author of Death Comes to Marlowe. Welcome. It's so good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be with you.
Well, we're really excited to talk to you. We have some questions and some reactions to your book. We enjoyed it a great deal. So earlier, just before we brought you on, we had a conversation in which we shared some of our own insights. So we want to get the real story. This is the third in you've written 3 books in this series, as I understand.
Yeah, that's right. Although it's a bit confusing for me because in the UK, we've just published the 4th book. So I've spent all of my time in the world of the 4th book. So it's very exciting to go back to the 3rd book and the 2nd book and the 1st book. It's always lovely to sort of revisit them. It's like visiting old children that you haven't seen for a while.
Well, congratulations on your success. We certainly have heard of Marlowe, and we were surprised when we started looking into it and found out you actually live there. That's wonderful.
Yes. Well, many years ago, I created a show that is shown, I think, on PBS in America called Death in Paradise. Right. And that's in the Caribbean, which is miles and miles away from the UK, obviously. And I love going out to the Caribbean. It's very exciting and exotic and glamorous. But of course, it's a fiddle to get to.
Yes.
So when I came up with my new show, I thought, I'm going to set it much nearer to home. And in fact, Marlowe's a perfect place to set a murder mystery because it's a sort of a quaint English town. It has bunting down the high street. The River Thames runs through it. It's got a pretty bridge and a pretty church. And it's actually a really good place to kill people. But the only problem is that now I've set it in my hometown, all of my neighbours think that they are killers. But then I do.
Now, Robert, do any of your neighbors or people in Marlowe associate themselves with the characters in your books? Some people think you're actually writing about them?
Well, funnily enough, there's one person who knows that I am writing about him, because when I was writing the first book, as a gift, as a little joke, as a little in-joke, I put our local postie in, a chap called Fred. And Fred's, you know this in America, it's the same the world over. The most important person in your community, apart from the priest, will be your post person, because they bring your post and they see how you are and they talk to the neighbours. So I put Fred in as a little gift, but I didn't put him in book 2. Oh my word, Fred was furious. In fear of him never delivering the post to me ever again, I put him back into book 3, and he's in all of the subsequent books because you never cross your postie.
Oh, okay. So that was a good point. And you're right about the postman. They definitely do know the neighborhood and what's going on with all of the people they deliver to. Want to ask you, Judith Potts was delightful. She was my favorite. And I really was wondering if you could tell us how you came up with her, how you created her.
Well, I also love Judith Potts. She's actually named after my mother's good friend Judith, who's a bit of a hoarder and lives on her own. But I was raised by my mother, yes, who's an amazing, wonderful woman, but also by this sort of coterie of great aunts and my grandmother Betty. And every day at 6 p.m, my grandmother Betty would have exactly one glass of whiskey in a cut glass decanter and a cut glass tumbler. And these amazing women, in modern days, they would have had jobs, they would have gone out and conquered the world. But I noticed when I was growing up that their husbands were the ones who went out. Their husbands had the status, their husbands wore the suits and earned the money. And I always wondered, what would these women do if they were solving crime? And it's a bit also like Jane Marple. I am obsessed and love Agatha Christie, the greatest, one of the greatest writers who's ever lived, and definitely the greatest murder mystery writer. And Jane Marple was this older woman who lived on her own, wasn't married, and society overlooked her. And I wanted to do, what would Jane Marple look like in 2025? An eccentric woman who lives on her own, doesn't apologise for that fact, lives life out and proud, and when a murder bumps into her, how would she go about solving it?
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful. She's a wonderful character. Of course, we like her friends as well, and I mean, your development of those characters was amazing, really.
I really enjoyed the dynamics between the 3 women and also the detective sergeant. She's wonderful too, a very unusual character, and how they were able to collaborate.
I started with Judith. Judith was my sort of keystone, and I realised I would have Judith, but I know I'm quite experienced at writing murder mysteries. It's quite hard for an amateur sleuth. I mean, we know this, we all read murder mystery books, don't we, with amateur sleuths. It's quite hard for them to solve crimes on their own. So I thought, I need Judith to gather together a gang of people who can solve crimes together. So Judith bumps into the first murder, and then through that she meets Susie, who's a single mum and a dog walker. And Susie, single mums in our community are some of the most impressive people around, because they, hold down a job, they raise their kids, they get to the school gates, they attend all of the parents' meetings. And I thought, just in the same way that a 78-year-old woman isn't normally the hero of a murder mystery story, let's have her meet up and to sort of gather a single mum as well, because I really wanted to say, come on, Susie, you can be a hero of this story as well. You too can catch murderers. And then there's the third person, which is Bex in Rebecca, and she's the vicar's wife. So she's very worried about what we think, but she's a housewife and she's a mother. She's defined mostly by what other people say of her. You know, it's not her story. So she's very tentative to start off with. But as we all know from reading murder mysteries with amateur sleuths, it's quite hard to get them to interact with the police. So I thought I'll have a fourth person. So the three people are the main ones, because three is a good dynamic for arguments. We know you can bicker well with three people. But the fourth person is Detective Sergeant Tanika Malik. And she's a bit like my wife. You know, I'm 50, I've just turned 53. And, you know, my wife was told, you know, you can have it all, you can have the career, you can have the kids, but she's still helping to look after her elderly parents. She has a disabled brother. So my wife, who loves her life and has a great time, is worked off her feet the whole time. You know, she has a feckless husband who doesn't necessarily help as much as she should. She's got a brother. The brother could help Martin, who's lovely, could help a bit more with, you know, looking after Ricky, her disabled brother. But sort of society lets Martin get away with it. So I wanted to take these four women who don't normally get to be heroes in these kinds of stories, put them together, and then in each book they bump into a golden age, you know, fair play murder mystery. And lo and behold, it's a bit of a spoiler, they do tend to catch the killer at the end.
Yes, they do.
And Bex particularly evolves a lot in your stories. She really comes out of her very prim and proper character to someone more willing to take a whiskey and, you know, to stand up to her husband and tell him the truth about some of the things she's been up to.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we admire that.
Yeah, you did a great job with that, Robert.
It's lovely for you to say. What's lovely about writing novels, because obviously I come from a television background, and in television, if you're writing an episode, say for you know, in the UK, it'd be a 60-minute episode. Well, you've got to kill someone. You know, that takes a few minutes. You've got to cart them off, and that takes a few minutes at the end of the episode. You know, and there'll be a denouement where the detective has to explain, you know, how the killer did it. And you find that in a 60-minute episode, all of these chunks of time are sort of already spoken for. But what's glorious about one book, and then that book becoming two or three, is you have time and space to really enjoy. I've enjoyed writing the characters and discovering them through the various stories and watching them develop has been a real joy for me. So I'm glad that you say that you've enjoyed it as well.
Oh, yes, it's fun to see them change and become more confident in themselves.
The expression that comes up, they're a gang. These women are a gang. They really are. They're awesome.
Yeah.
The way they...
Oh, thank you. Gosh, it's really kind of you to say. I believe so too. I mean, I love writing them. And what I find also as the book series progresses is, and this is a sign of madness, but they talk to me. So when I'm writing a scene and they come across a dead body, or when they're sort of going through the evidence, I can hear their voices and they're bickering and chatting away and disagreeing with each other. And it feels like sometimes that I'm taking dictation from them. That there's no creation on my part. It's just them talking back at me. And that's a wonderful feeling as a writer, when you feel the flow with your characters through a scene. It's delightful.
Well, what you just said rings so true. When you read that book, you're there. It's like you're going, your head's going this way, this way, this way. Beck, Susie, Judith. It's...
And I did relate to Judith quite a bit, because as your grandmother reminded you of that age, of that particular group of women, that era, my mother was part of that era. And she also would have her scotch, which she preferred, not at 6 o'clock, but at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, heavens.
Yes, and yes.
I
always thought 6 o'clock was a little early, but 4 o'clock, that's...
Yes,
Question for you, if I may. I know that in the book, Judith keeps an incident board. And I found myself reading the story, doing an imaginary incident board, trying to follow the clues and line them up, and this I have to remember this one, because this is going to come back. I know it's going to come back. And doing that, I wonder, do you as an author, I mean, how do you juggle all these pieces of your story? It can't possibly come together linearly. You must have some grand scheme.
Yes, well, Graham's team is overselling it, but I do plan the whole thing. But as I say, I love Agatha Christie, and if we think of an Agatha Christie novel, there's quite often, and certainly in her big novels, her famous novels, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, or Death on the Nile, or and then there were none. I mean, she wrote a lot of very good books. There's a trick at the end, isn't there? There's a reveal. If we think of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, there's a very specific reveal at the end that means she must have known that before she started writing the book. So I will always start with the reveal at the end. I'll have to think of what's the trick? How can I maybe smuggle the killer past the reader? And then having come up with that reveal, I then try and come up with a world that would fit that reveal and characters that would fit. And what weirdly happens is I sort of start at the end of the story and then work backwards through it until I get to the beginning of the story and then try and see if it all makes sense. So it does mean that I've planned and plotted every single moment, clue and red herring and character development. And it's quite a dry way to work because I effectively do all of the work on the novel before I even get to write one word. But it does mean that once I start writing it, I can have fun. So I don't have to worry about what's happening next because I know what's happening next because there's a 40-page Word document with it all written out. And this is when the characters come alive. And in that first pass when I'm writing it is so joyous because finally I get to write the jokes and the fun and the joy rather than just very dryly, having the clues and the leads.
Wow, I love your process. Your process is wonderful and it works.
The thing that I noticed...
It's a bit mad. It's not a great way to work. It's quite hard.
Well, I know you enjoyed that ending because I took the time to look very carefully. It takes you 30 pages to do the climax, which I love.
Yeah.
The way you set that up, it wasn't just here's the answer. Did you notice? And somebody pops out from behind the curtain. No. Judith and the perpetrator go through this long process of putting it all together for you. How entertaining was that? That was exciting to watch. And you kept it going for 30 pages.
Well, I'm a great believer. The best books are for me, no, not the best books, the best murder mysteries for me are fair play murder mysteries. I always, when I write either a TV episode of Death in Paradise, or we've turned the Marlin Murder Club into a TV show as well. Whenever we're developing a story, or I'm developing a story, I always want that moment that happens in Agatha Christie where the detective says, I've solved it.
Yeah.
And at that point, the detective should have exactly the same amount of information as the reader or the TV watcher. So you've put clues in all the way through, and only the detective has worked out which ones matter and which ones are fake. But when you go into that denouement, that big ending, I think for me personally, I love it when they explain that, this cork came out of a different bottle than the one you were expecting. And then, and you describe that kind of the cascade of events that led to the capture of the killer. And when it works, when you hope that what you're describing is each step is quite simple, but it takes you to an incredible solution, which is the revelation of who the killer is,
how they did it, why they did it, who, how, and why.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now can we expect more Marlowe books, Robert? I know you just said you have your fourth, but it's only in Great Britain. Is that right?
Yes, I'm afraid. I have to get it translated into American, which always seems to take longer than you'd have thought. Every time we have car boots in this country. You call them trunks. Every time I write, I try not to put any car boots in the book because I don't want to have to delay the delivery. But yes, my American publisher, Poison Pen Press, have got it, and it will come out this year. But I'm slightly out of sync with the American ones. And there's a fifth one. Funny enough, this is how strange writing books is. It takes so long to write a book.
Yeah.
Having written book 3, which has come out in America, and having just published book 4, which has just come out only last week in the UK, I'm currently writing book 5.
Well,
so
congratulations.
Good.
Wonderful. We look forward to it.
Will there be another film version?
Yes, we're doing a second series of the Marlin Murder Club, which I think should be really exciting. So in the first series, I really wanted to sort of spend time showing the audience who Bex and Susie and Judith and Tanika are. So we told the story of that first book over 4 hours, you know, with adverts and everything, but basically over 4 hours. But moving forward into series 2, we're going to do Death Comes to Marlowe, which is the second book in the book series. But we've also got a couple more new murder mysteries for the gang to solve as well. So I'm really excited about
The gang,
that.
you see.
We filmed it over the summer here in the UK. Lovely weather, beautiful, lovely shooting days here in Marlow. The town welcomes the production very
I
amazingly.
bet, yeah.
With the town council. You know, we shoot in the real church. You know, everything that you see in the TV show is real. We film it here. You know, Judith's house is a real house just outside Marlow. There it is on the river. Where she swims is just outside Marlow. So the second series will be out in America very, very soon, I think. I don't know the exact transmission dates. And then fingers crossed there might be a third series after then.
Oh, wonderful.
You know, as long as
Excellent.
people want it, I'll write it.
Wonderful. We look forward to that. And I would say Marlowe really becomes one of the characters in the book.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it just draws our attention and kind of welcomes us into the whole story. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and it should do. You know, the location of a story, the setting is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, very.
Well, I think there's an interesting point that you made about the American edition and the English edition, the British edition. One characteristic that struck me, I don't know whether it's the difference between America and England, but in your book, everybody's chatty. Judith, they go up and they ask direct questions. And oh my goodness. And everybody answers them. They're so forthcoming. They don't have to force clues to come out.
Yes, that's partly because it's a murder mystery and we need people to give up their secrets. But it's also, I tend to set my stories in worlds of very garrulous, very chatty people. I mean, it's not a coincidence, because then when you meet them, it's a slightly heightened world, isn't it? These people are real in the sense that when the murder happens, I want it to be a real murder and for it to really matter. And it really matters to our heroes that they catch the killer and put that person behind bars. But the characters that you meet are quite often larger than life. So yes, they will be chatty. Because that's how, you know, all of the best, Jessica Fletcher onwards, that's how you catch him. You get them to talk.
Well, Robert Thorogood, it's been marvelous chatting with you.
Yeah, it sure has.
We really appreciate it tremendously. And we highly recommend the book.
Yeah, and thank you for coming all the way to California for us this morning. It's just morning here.
We hope to see you again.
Well,
Yeah, hope so.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely talking to you. Have a great day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Well, that's about it for Eyes on Books today. I certainly hope you enjoyed our little interview with Robert Thorogood. I also hope that you pick up this book because Jonathan and I really believe you would enjoy it. And as Robert just told us, he's now working on his 5th. The 4th should be coming out in the United States before too long. And he has another series that we'll have to look for on PBS. So thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it.